Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline, this is Novel Inc, and today I'm going to be discussing the books that I read during the first half of February. I decided to split my wrap up into two parts for the month of February. I was inspired to do this because my friend Chelsea did this month, my friend Jane does this almost every month, and they are both infinitely wiser than me. Also, I read 12 books in the first half of February, so it would just make my end of the month wrap up incredibly long if I talked about everything I read in February at the end of the month. This will be definitely the longer wrap up for this month. Like part 2 will be much shorter, but I figured I would just go ahead and make things easier on myself and hopefully on all of you, because I tend to go more into depth than I originally planned when I do wrap ups and they just end up being so long. So I'm gonna start splitting my wrap ups into 2 parts every month when I feel that the month warrants that. It's just gonna depend on how much I read during the first half of every month, and I'm gonna make a judgment call with each individual month based on that. Anyway, like I said, I read 12 books during the first half of February, so until the 14th, and this covers half the ContemporaryAthon because the ContemporaryAthon was running the week of Valentine's Day. I, as usual, am gonna go in order of my star rating for the books that I read, and let's go ahead and get into the books. Hello, Editing Madeline here. I don't know what was going through my head when I sat down to plan for this video and when I sat down to film this video, but I neglected to mention the fact that I participated, in addition to ContemporaryAthon, I participated in 2 month-long reading initiatives in the month of February, and those were Feminist Lit February and BLACKATHon. I will leave all of the hosts of both of those linked down below. And I also didn't mention whether or not any of the books that I read fit for challenges for any of those things. So throughout this video, I'm going to write on the screen when a book that I'm talking about fit a challenge for one of these reading initiatives that I was doing, because like I said, I don't know what I was thinking, but I just did not talk about that at all in this video, so it's gonna be left on the screen. Okay, that's all for me. I will go ahead and say though that February has been a much better reading month for me than January. January wasn't awful, but I was saying in my last month's wrap up that I didn't really, the only 5 stars that I had in January were rereads, and this month I've had my first like real 5-star books of 2019, and I just have had a really great reading month in general, so I'm excited to share all of these with you guys. With that being said, my least favorite thing that I read in the first half of this month was Southern Lady Code by Helen Ellis. I received an e-arc of this from Doubleday, so thank you to them for sending an e-copy my way. However, this just didn't really land for me. This is an essay collection by Helen Ellis, who wrote, I think, American Housewife is her other essay collection. I requested this after hearing the ladies on the Book Riot podcast be really excited about this one. The Book Riot All the Books podcast. And it ended up just not being a favorite. I think that Helen Ellis has a really strong voice that is present throughout that essay collection, but her humor doesn't always land, or at least it didn't always land for me. I think that a lot of the things she talks about in the essays in Southern Lady Code are things that almost no one would relate to except for a select group of very privileged, probably white, probably straight women. I think that a huge part of being a humorist is kind of being able to read the room, and maybe I just wasn't the target audience for this, but yeah, a lot of the humor didn't land for me because I just could not relate to Helen Ellis having to buy a $1,500 Burberry coat to replace the one that she switched with another woman's coat at a party. You know? I feel like the title is a little bit misleading, right? It's called Southern Lady Code, and as a Southern lady, I was very excited for that. But there wasn't really a lot of talk about Southern culture or like what it means to be a woman in the South, which was what I was really hoping this would be, and kind of what I think that the blurb leads you to believe it's going to be. So overall, this isn't an awful essay collection, and I might pick up more from Helen Ellis in the future, but Southern Lady Code didn't really land for me, and I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. Getting into my 3-star books for this part of the month, the first of those is one that I read during the ContemporaryAthon. It was a graphic novel called Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell. I thought this was okay. I loved the representation. It is a female-female romance, so we have lots of sapphic characters, we have plus-size characters, we have lots of racial diversity and diversity in terms of the identities of the different queer characters in this novel. However, I found the plot to be really all over the place in this one. It just took some wild turns that I just didn't expect and took me for a wild ride that was not an enjoyable wild ride. Again, not a book that I think is bad, it just really didn't do it for me. I ended up giving Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me 3 stars. Then I read an e-arc of You'd Be Mine by Erin Hahn, which I received via the publisher through NetGalley, so thank you to Wednesday Books for sending me a copy for review. This was pretty good. It is about two main characters who are both country singers, and they end up going on a tour together. The female protagonist, her parents are like country music legends, and they both died very tragic deaths that were very highly publicized, and she's kind of dealing with being the child of these like country music legends, and also having to deal with like her parents' decisions in a lot of ways. And then the other protagonist we follow is Clay, our male main character, who is struggling with like alcoholism and kind of trying to reconcile the fact that the image that he presents to the world and the person that he is inside are not the same. So this, I expected it to be like a cutesy, summery country music romance, but it was actually way dark and way darker than I expected. It ended up taking some really dark turns and was upsetting to read at times, I found, but I still, like, for the most part enjoyed this. I think Clay was very much like a love interest that I would never go for personally, but so that kind of hindered my enjoyment of it as well, because I just felt like he was kind of an asshole. Like the tortured bad boy thing doesn't really do it for me, but I did appreciate a lot of the subject matter that this book tried to address, and as a fan of country music and just a person who loves the music world in general, I enjoyed the setting of this story a lot, but I did find the romance to be a little bit frustrating at times, and I found both main characters to be a little frustrating at times as well. Overall though, like I say, this was not a bad book. I still, my net enjoyment of it was greater than my dislike of it. I ended up giving You'd Be Mine 3 stars. Now, getting into my 4-star reads from the first half of February. The first of those is a really short little graphic novel called A Quick and Easy Guide to Queer and Trans Identities. I picked this up from Oni Press at ALA midwinter this year, so thank you to Margot and to Oni Press for sending me home with a copy of this. This is pretty much exactly what it purports to be. It is a quick and easy guide to queer and trans identities. Emphasis on the quick and easy parts. This didn't teach me anything that I personally, as someone in the queer community and as someone who has been involved with the queer community for a very long time, didn't know, but I'm glad that this exists as a resource, and the format of this story was like super cute. It was told from the perspective of a snail, and yeah, I'm glad that this exists, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think that it's going to be a really great resource and it's going to help a lot of people. Then if you watch my January wrap up, you know that in January I ended up reading an erotica threesome novella that Jane recommended to me, and this month in the first half of February I read the other erotica threesome novella by Delilah Fisher. This one was called The Good Listener. It was 2 women and a guy, and much like Editor's Note, which was the one that I read in January, this is just 3 people banging. Like, that's all it is, and that's all that it claims to be, but like, the sex is well written, and it was fun to read, and you know, it was all the good things, but you know, it's nothing more than like some sex on the page. So if that's something you're into, you should definitely check these out. I really enjoyed both of Delilah Fisher's novellas for sure. Next, for my 4-star reads, I have a book that I had been very highly anticipating, and I was able to pick up an ARC and get it signed, in fact, at ALA Midwinter this year. This comes out toward the end of March, so it won't be long now until it is out in the world, and that is Once in Future by Amy Rose Capetta and Corey McCarthy. Amy Rose and Corey are actually partners. I think they're married, so it's just like a co-written queer retelling of the Arthurian legend. I'm not typically a sci-fi reader, so even though Amy Rose Capetta is one of my absolute favorite authors, I hadn't previously read Corey McCarthy, but Amy Rose is one of my absolute favorite authors, and if she attaches her name to a project, there is like a 99.9% chance that I will pick it up. But I was a little hesitant going into this, even though Amy Rose was one of the authors for this book, because I'm just not a big sci-fi reader. However, I thought this was really fun. It was so queer. We have gay characters, bi characters, non-binary characters, pan characters, asexual characters. Like, this really did a good job of being a very inclusive queer book, and there was also a decent bit of racial diversity among the main cast of characters as well. Overall, like, I just had a fun time reading this, and I feel like a lot of my friends who have read it have enjoyed it less than I do, but I think that's because they read more sci-fi than I do, and this is like, genre is so foreign to me that I just had a fun time reading it, and that's kind of what I base my rating on. But like, I know that the pacing wasn't perfect and the plot kind of jumps all over the place, but I really loved the romance at the center of this book between Ari and Guinevere, and I thought this was an interesting way to retell the Arthurian legend. Most of all though, with the ending of this book, I'm so excited for the sequel, because I think the sequel is going to be so good. It's kind of gonna be like, the story's gonna go off in a totally different direction, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here. Overall, I thought, like I said, I just had a blast reading this, and it was just so very queer, and I recommend checking it out for sure. It's a great first installment, and I can't wait to see where the series goes from here. I ended up giving this 4 stars. Then I read a highly anticipated fantasy release. This book actually came out at the end of January, but I had been waiting to read it because I'd already pre-ordered a copy because I attended a tour event for this book, and that of course was King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. This book is so much more massive than I anticipated that it would be. I really enjoyed King of Scars. I was going into it fresh off of my reread of the Grisha trilogy and the Six of Crows duology last month, so at the time that I picked this up, I was still very much like immersed in the Grishaverse, and it felt good to just dive right back in. Overall, I super enjoyed this. It is definitely a quieter book. It is definitely slower paced, but I think that that gave us a little bit more time to just explore and like hang out in the Grishaverse as readers, as opposed to just going from like plot point to plot point to plot point as we do in so much of the Six of Crows duology and the Grisha trilogy. You know, the action in those 2 series moves at a lot quicker pace than the action in King of Scars. So I enjoyed reading a kind of quieter, slower paced book set in the Grishaverse. I will say, though Nikolai is the title character, the King of Scars, his perspective to me took a backseat to Zoya's and Nina's perspectives. I think that Zoya and Nina are definitely the 2 like shining stars of this book. Nina has a budding female-female romance with a new character named Hana that I am so excited to see where that goes in book 2, and I like fell in love with Zoya Nazialinsky after this book. What a good character. Leigh Bardugo is so good at developing characters' backstories and just making you fall in love with them despite their faults, and that is exactly what she did with Zoya in this book, in my opinion. Yeah, overall, like, I super enjoyed this. I know this has had like pretty mixed responses, but again, like, I'm also not a big fantasy reader, so I don't know if I should like be judging the quality of fantasy, right? Like, I don't know. Also, after the ending of this, very excited for book 2. The last of my 4-star books for this wrap up was a book that I read during the ContemporaryAthon this round, and that was On the Comeup by Angie Thomas. This is another one that I went to a book event for and ended up getting signed, which was super fun, and I really enjoyed this. It is set in Garden Heights, which is the town in which The Hate U Give is set, but we follow a very different main character. We follow Brianna, who is an aspiring rapper, and she ends up going viral for kind of all the wrong reasons. One of her raps ends up going viral, and it's about her kind of dealing with the repercussions of that. I just thought that this was so well done. I loved following Brianna as a main character. I think that Angie Thomas really excels at writing 2 things, at writing dialogue, number 1, and at writing characters, number 2. And I think those 2 things feed into one another for sure. Her dialogue is just so good, and I feel like I get to know her characters through their dialogue with other characters, which I really appreciate from an author. And yeah, I loved Brianna. I loved her whole group of friends, and I thought this was great. I thought this had a lot of great social commentary as well. And if you enjoyed The Hate U Give, I can't imagine that you won't also really enjoy On the Comeup as well. I have one 4.5-star book to cover in this wrap up, and it's another book I read during the ContemporaryAthon. I talked about it a lot in my ContemporaryAthon vlogs because I buddy read this with Jane and Chelsea, and all 3 of us loved it. That book is Girls on the Verge by Sharon Biggs Waller. This is a YA contemporary coming out in April, and it follows a main character who becomes pregnant, and she and 2 of her friends take a road trip to basically allow her to get an abortion because they live in Texas. This is set in Texas in 2014 when the abortion laws in that state were particularly strict. Even this was heartbreaking, but it was also very honest and raw, and I'm very happy that a book like this is being published, because I think that we need to talk openly about reproductive health and about the freedom of choice. Like it or not, this is an issue that so many teenage girls are facing, and I think that this book's open and honest discussion of such a sensitive subject matter was really wonderful. And like I say, I'm just happy that this is getting published. I cried like a baby at the end of this book. It's a read that infuriates you because seeing the lengths that women have to go through just to exercise very basic agency over their own bodies is endlessly frustrating and ridiculous, and this book really served to drive that point home. Yeah, I loved this so much, and like I say, I think that it is going to be a very important story. It's a story that I'm glad is being told, and I highly recommend, if you can deal with the subject matter, giving this a read once it comes out in April. Also, I lied. There's another 4.5-star book that I read during the first half of February that I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about, and that is A Girl Like Her by Talia Hibbert. I read this because it was the book club pick for February for the Dragons and Tea book club, which is a Goodreads book club run by Melanie from Mel to the Any and Amy from A Court of Crowns and Quills. I will leave the Goodreads group linked down below so that you can join us and read with us. But A Girl Like Her is a romance novel. Our main character in this book is autistic and Black, and she starts falling for the new guy who's moved to town, who moves into the apartment next to her, and like this was just one of the best romances I've read in such a long time. Everything about it was so good. This was my first Talia Hibbert book, which I just cannot believe, and I totally understand why everyone loves her book so much, because the romance was just so swoony and so perfect. The love interest was incredible. I loved our main character Ruth. She was just like a gem, and I loved reading about her. Everything about it was so well executed. So if you're looking for a good romance to pick up, especially a good romance with a lot of great own voices representation, definitely recommend that you pick up A Girl Like Her. And then I have 2 5-star books to talk about to round out the end of this wrap up. I finally had 5-star books that were not rereads. I'm so excited. I had 2 of them in the first half of this month. The first of those was a short story collection of speculative fiction, and it was How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. I read the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin last year and just absolutely fell in love with that story and with N.K. Jemisin as a writer. And this short story collection is some of the best short fiction I have ever read. I listened to a good chunk of this on audio as well, and the audiobook has a bunch of different narrators that take turns narrating the different stories. And I thought this was so good, and I couldn't be happier that I picked this up during Black History Month. Yeah, I just think the stories in this book cover such a wide like variety of settings and subjects and protagonists and genres, but it's all speculative fiction. It's all like leaning towards science fiction or fantasy. I would say more towards science fiction for most of these, and really there wasn't a story that I disliked in this collection. My favorites though were probably Valedictorian, Cuisine de Memoir, and probably the last story, Sinners, Saints, Dragons, and Haints in the City Beneath the Still Waters. All of it was so good though, and I think that if you enjoy short story collections, and actually even if you don't normally enjoy short story collections, you might not have found the right one, and this might be the right one for you. I think it's gonna be the right one for a lot of people. Super love this. It cemented my love of N.K. Jemisin as a fantastically talented, forever favorite author, and yeah, this was just so very good. 5 stars. Easily. The last book I have to talk about in this wrap up was my other 5-star read of this half of February, and it's another book I read during the ContemporaryAthon that I absolutely loved and that I talked a lot about in my ContemporaryAthon vlogs, but that book is Jack of Hearts and Other Parts by L.C. Rosen. This, I was blindsided by how much I absolutely loved this story. I buddy read this with Chelsea during the ContemporaryAthon. We both kind of changed our TBRs in the middle of the readathon so that we could read this together, and I'm forever so happy that we did, because we both ended up loving it. Jack of Hearts and Other Parts follows our main character Jack, who identifies as gay, and he begins authoring a sex advice column for his peers. He's kind of notorious amongst his peers for like having a lot of sex and being very public about the fact that he has a lot of sex. So he starts doing this sex advice column, but shortly after he starts this column, he starts receiving like anonymous letters from basically a stalker who is a little bit obsessed with him. So there's like a little bit of a mystery plot in this book as well. but like I appreciated this book so much for all of the themes that it discussed. Like the mystery plot was neither here nor there for me. It's very easy to guess who is behind these letters, and the resolution of that wasn't all that exciting to me. What I really loved about this book and what made it a 5-star read for me were the themes that it discussed, especially pertaining to the fetishization of queer people by straight people. It specifically talks about the fetishization of gay men and gay sex and just queer men in general by straight women, and I just loved the conversation around that in this book. I thought it was very important, very necessary, especially because the author is a man and it is own voices representation. I'm just so happy that a book like this was published. I'm kind of shocked that it was published in the form that it was published. It's a good kind of shock. Like I'm very happy that this story is out there because it talks so frankly and so openly about sex between queer people. It also, even though it like heavily focuses on sex and it doesn't shy away from, you know, descriptions, sometimes graphic descriptions, it's also like very inclusive of people who maybe identify on the ace or aro spectrum, which I really appreciated. There was just so much thought put into this, and I think that this is the kind of queer story that I've been missing in my library of queer books that I've read. Like I've said with a couple books that I've mentioned in this video so far, like this is just a story that I'm really glad exists, and I just fucking loved it, and I think that more people need to read it because it is criminally underhyped. It came out last fall, I believe, and I've only seen a couple people read it, but I think that it's a book that a lot of people really enjoy and appreciate, and I highly recommend all of you pick it up if it sounds interesting to you at all. With that, we have come to the end of my wrap up for the first half of February. Definitely let me know down below what you read during the first half of February, and I would love to know as well if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought of them. Second half of my February wrap up will be up in a couple of days. Until then, all of my social media links will be down below so that we can be friends. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I will see you very soon in another one. Bye!